Welcome to the Art of Healing podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to helping you connect with your mind, body, and spirit. This is Charlize, physician and Reiki master, and thank you so much for joining me. I would like to remind you that although I'm a physician, the information you receive in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. You can find my full disclaimer at my website, www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. If you like what you hear on this podcast, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Check your show notes for more information and for the link to sign up. Thank you. Welcome back to the Art of Healing podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for this special episode to start off the month of June, the brightest month of the year. I am so fortunate to have a holistic healer and a New Earth visionary, Amanda Monnier. She is joining me as a guest on the podcast. Amanda knows she is here to assist with the anchoring of the New Earth in the oneness consciousness of this planet. According to Amanda, the veil is thin and the old ways simply do not work. In Amanda's work, she has transitioned from a career in law enforcement into working with the souls. She believes that inside each one of us, there's an activation and an inner healer that's just waiting to come out and to be in contact with our own divinity. Amanda holds space for healing ancestral patterns, conditioning, imprints, beliefs, and shifting into full embodiment. I am so happy to have Amanda, who is, in addition to a healer, a New Earth visionary, a mentor, a fellow podcaster who has a podcast on the New Earth visionaries, a published author, and a certified yoga teacher. I think you'll find this episode to be enlightening and inspiring. Thank you so much. Let's get started. Hit record here. All right. Hello, Art of Healing podcast listeners. I am so happy you're joining me for this very special episode. I've got an amazing, very intriguing guest who, from reading her information, listening to some of her episodes, I think we're all going to get a little bit of a light cellular activation from her. So this is Amanda Monnier. She is transitioned from her work in law enforcement to working more with the New Earth and oneness and consciousness of the world. She is an energy worker, she's a healer, and she does lots of coaching. And I'm going to repeat this a couple times during the episode, but if you're wanting to connect with Amanda, you'll just go with Amanda Monnier, and that's spelled AmandaMonnier.com. And her first and last name is where you'll find her on Instagram, where you'll find her on Facebook as well. And she is also a fellow podcaster. Her podcast is called New Earth Visionaries, which I have also become a subscriber and a listener because I found it very helpful. I like the questions she asks her guests. I just find it very amazing. So Amanda has agreed to be a guest, and I wanted to approach her really with no huge agenda. I'm going to let her introduce herself and just kind of see where we go. So Amanda, please introduce my listeners to you.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited and just grateful to be here with you today and with all of you listening as well. So yeah, it's always interesting, like where we start when we introduce ourselves, because it's like there's so many places I could start from. But I guess I'll start with what I'm doing currently and who I assist and a little bit about that. So I'm a holistic healer and actually have kind of started using the term healing facilitator because I'm not actually doing the work. You're doing the work if you're working on your own healing. And I am really just so passionate about helping others remember the truth of who they are, stepping back into that essence, that divine essence that we can never lose. It oftentimes will just get mucked up by the conditioning, the programming, the things that we've subscribed to over our life. That was a path of least resistance at one time, may have served us at one point, but we can actually pull off all that density and really come back to that center of the truth of who we are. So that is what I'm just super passionate about. really helping with. And yeah, I love all things podcasting. So just sharing stories. And I always preface everything that it's like, take what resonates and leave the rest. So anything that I share, it's coming from my lens and my own perspective, but this is your unique journey. And we all have we have a unique soul frequency, a unique soul blueprint. And so it's really about just coming back to that. And we can take, the mentorship and all the other beautiful tools, but they're simply just tools, and everything that we ever need is within us. And sometimes we forget that. And so I found that it's just a remembrance of this. So that's short, condensed version of what I do and kind of what I'm about. So
And before we get too much into some of my questions, can you tell the listeners how you work with individuals? Because I was able to look something your website. Looks like you've got quite a bit, like programs, you've got free stuff, you've got a lot of ways to connect. How would individuals be working with you?
yeah, there's a variety of things. Yeah, as you mentioned, there's some free meditation, guided healings on there on my website. And the one thing that is just so near and dear to my heart at the moment is my group offering, which is called the Embodied Essence Community. So all of my programs and all of my offerings go in there. So one thing I'm also very passionate about is providing a lot of value to people. And so the way that I work with people in that container is stepping into conscious creation. So I found in my practice that there is kind of a 3-step process that I use in the healing work that I do with people. And so one is conscious creation. So we're stepping into the end results of what it is that we love to experience, what we're choosing. How do you want to feel? Embodiment of that. And I always say this or something more expansive, because half the time I don't know that the universe has some other thing in store that I didn't really even think of at the time. And so we can start to lay that foundation of this more aligned identity structures, because we take on a lot of identity structures that can be really not congruent with who we actually are. And so there's another component that I just refer to as the energy healing piece, which is just the releasing the resistance of what it is that is preventing you from being able to experience those things that are expansive to your soul in this lifetime. So that can be anything from ancestral programming to emotional events that are unresolved and still vibrating in the energy system. It can be soul contracts, belief work, you name it, but it's all just energy, right? So if we make it so simple as it's just a frequency and it's vibrating in your energy field, and everything is about frequency and resonance. And that's where we start to see it in our physical reality. And then the third thing I love to touch on is this energy of presence, being in the now, because all we have is the now. So when we're so far into the future and we're so far into the past, it's like it can create a lot of discording, and it can send us down some pathways, which may serve a purpose also. So I'm here for normalizing everybody's own healing journey. I've gone down some, roads where I'm like, oh yeah, this doesn't feel good. And I learn a very valuable lesson. So sometimes that can also be perfect, but really just coming back to the now and understanding that even if we're in the space of conscious creation, we're creating, we're magnetizing to the things that we'd like to experience, but also showing up at a place where it could manifest in a day, it could manifest in a year, but we're so whole. We're in that energy of so neutral, so whole, so in harmony with everything that it's like we get to have that as an enhancement to this remembrance that we are a whole, healthy being, and that part of what we're here to do is be, and not always be in that production, consumption, do mode, because I got into that for the first 30 years or so of my life and even the first year of my business, where it was all about production, consumption, everything being definitive of all the external accolades, all the things, all the shoulds, right? We can all fill in the blank for our own shoulds of things we've been told by family members, friends, society, to where we just have this guilt and shame, where if we don't measure up to what societal standards are, and I'm doing air quotes, then it's like we're not good enough. And it's all simply not true, because it's all a distortion. All of that external noise is a distortion, but we can actually come to really believe these things. I sure did for many years, and I'm still unraveling, as they come up. And that's one thing I found as well, is that the stuff always shows itself up. So we don't have to schedule 20 healing sessions and go on a fishing expedition and reinforce that, we're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. This stuff, like I mentioned, it does rise to the surface when we're ready and have the tools to release it.
Amanda, as you talk, you make it look so easy. I have to say
how difficult it's been.
you make it sound so simple. And as you were just sharing that, I was thinking, what if it's so easy, what's holding us all back?
Yeah.
Because just watching you, for the listeners and watchers, because this will be YouTube video, it was just very easy breezy what you described. And I'm all on board, but then I'm like, wait, I feel some limits coming up. So
yep.
What when you're working with your clients, with your students, what are top things you think are holding us back?
So I just, before I get into that, it definitely, for me, it hasn't been sunshine and rainbows. So I mentioned that piece around the energy healing and these waves of dark night of the soul that I've experienced, because I'm an open book. I'm all about being raw and vulnerable. Last year, when I left my job a year and a half ago or so and started this healing business. And I thought last year I was just going to jump right in and it was going to be perfect. Little did I know that I was going to be doing the deepest healing work I've ever done in my life. And I've been on this healing journey for about 8 years. So I cried more tears last year than I probably ever have. But what I've learned is it's like when we identify with that is us, then it's like we're almost holding on to even the releasing of the pain and of the emotions. So something that I've found is when I'm having a difficult day or I'm feeling an emotion coming up, I'll ask myself like what I need. I'll ask my body what my body needs, rather than just doing something to avoid it or trying to just quickly, dismantle it. Because and to answer your question, a lot of things that have come up, a lot of it is around the childhood and the child healings and those themes and patterns, because it's the pattern that's coming up, the pattern to where, for me, it was a lot of abandonment wounding growing up. And so it manifested itself in my romantic relationships. And so I always used to say, same man, different face. And these men would show up and they would affirm these beliefs that I had about myself. So it was that if my dad leaves, everyone's going to leave. And my parents divorced. My dad was in the picture, but it was around the story that my 6-year-old little girl was like, well, I'm too much. My dad left. I'm not worthy. Everybody leaves. And so these things that these stories that I told myself, and it was really difficult for me. And so these patterns continue to show up in my life. And what I've noticed is that these patterns will often come up, the things that we believe to be true about the world, about ourselves, they will show up. And then we have an opportunity to either step into this more victim consciousness energy of, well, that life is happening at me, it's happening to me. Or when the emotion comes up, it's like, oh, maybe even I don't know what to do. This is really uncomfortable or whatever's coming up, but I'm willing to see it. I'm willing to shine the light on it. And to me, that's where I found the difference, is that when we're willing to see the truth, even if it's a bit uncomfortable, we have all the power in the world to shift these things, because it starts with us. It doesn't start with, what my boyfriend's doing or what my friends are doing, as much as we might think that. It can be a beautiful mirror to what's going on inside if something uncomfortable is coming up. So the one thing that I start with clients on is that just reminding them, you're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. That's one thing I mentioned earlier. And it's just so important, because we've all been through our own flavor of struggle. We've all been through our own flavor of big trauma, little trauma, whatever. It's not about comparison. But what we can remember is, first, like I mentioned, stepping into that truth of who you are. And then the density will show itself. It's always showing itself every day when we get upset if we're driving and someone cuts us off. And it may be that pattern of like, gosh, nobody sees me. And it's like, this person cut me off. And it's just that triggers that thing inside of your body. And what we can do, and what I found to be so powerful, is in the pause. So it goes back to, again, not being in this flow where we're in our unconscious autopilot, we can really bring it into the pause. And even if it's so difficult, just taking a breath can even start to break up that story, because we're not letting the story run the show anymore. We're bringing the awareness, even if we don't know how. That's maybe later down the line. We can really unravel it by just presencing ourselves, taking a breath and acknowledging what's happening in our body and acknowledging what we're sensing, feeling, seeing, showing up, rather than letting it run off. And then we're just upset. If the example of someone cutting us off, maybe it's a moment to take a pause and be like, okay, what's coming up in my body, rather than just letting that story play out on repeat.
One of your specialties in your healing practice is inner child healing. As a concept, this has become endlessly fascinating to me because I really just learned about it just a few years ago. And I've been in practice as a physician almost 20 years. So it's a little shocking that in my training, it never came up. Now, from my approach, what has been and how I've kind of entered into it, well, other than my own as well, but was learning what's something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Score. And so for me, it's helped me to understand, when work with myself, working with others, this inner child concept. My listeners have heard it from my stance, coming from that like Western science. Why don't you just run it from the other direction? Because like I said, it's something that's new to me. I explore it with my listeners, but I'd love for you to delve into this inner child, because you mentioned like the 6-year-old form of yourself, that emotional trauma, and then like it gets magnified over the years. So yes, please share more.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love this topic and this conversation because it's applicable to everyone, I feel, because it's just, I call it reparenting the inner child. Oftentimes we had caregivers that were in their unconscious, so they weren't able to necessarily bring these like the conversations we're having now. We've evolved as a society, I feel, and these are more open, where we're having these conversations. But 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, that might not have been the case. It was kind of like stuff the emotions, or suck it up, buttercup, or just get over it, or men don't cry, what, fill in the blank, right? So what I have found is, I feel like our inner child lives inside of us. It's a part of us. And so if we've had a lot of that stuff happen, then it depends on also what. So if someone's had a ton of trauma in their life, the first step may not be even going there. It might be also working with the nervous system and the body, because if we don't feel safe to be here in this physical body, I found that when people have a lot of trauma, like parts of them will leave the body. And so they're not even fully here. So let's say that that's not the case. One thing that I found really helpful is we can actually go back to an event and we can do what I call a change history. So time, as we know it, is a human construct. It knows no limits when we actually pull apart that we live in this quantum time-space reality. So we can actually go back to that moment that painful memory happened. And it depends on also what the client needs, of course, but we can be an observer. We can go in and we can give that child what the child needed. We can shift pain to wisdom. So we can go in as the big Amanda, and we can go in and we can hold space for that child, whether that means that like we're just going to end up crying it out, or maybe there's a conversation or a dialogue, or maybe we're sharing wisdom. I talk to my inner child all the time. When stuff happens, I'm like, you're safe. I can feel this thing coming up. Or like sometimes the cry is needed, or the anger, or the emotion processing, because the child never was able to move through that. And so one of the modalities that I use, I don't even necessarily have a name for it, because it's kind of been taken from each of the modalities that I've had training on, but we work with the higher self. So the higher self is a field of information. We've all heard of the higher self. We can call it super conscious, higher self. It's just the all that isness of you. So this part of you doesn't sleep. This part of you contains information, past, present, future. It's all in the now anyway. And so this part we can have this part help pull those different pieces of the trauma. And what we want to do too is address it at the root, because when we address it at the root, we can do what I refer to as a change history. So we're kind of just like rewriting the script. And we do that on all levels. So this is rewiring the brain. This is releasing that trauma from the body. And I can at least speak from my experience in using this. It's been just night and day different. My body's even started to change. And it's like this reverse aging has happened, because what happens is this trauma sits in our field. And if we talk of the vibrational frequency spectrum, the emotions of guilt, shame, unworthy, those are the lowest vibrating emotions and frequencies. Whereas, we've all felt at one point or another, probably some of those denser ones, but then we have the frequencies of joy, love, like we can all feel the expansiveness of those ones, even when we say the word. And so if those low vibrational emotions are sitting in the body, be it the organs, the tissues, like they're somewhere. And what's happening is in the body system, the divine intelligence of our body is not necessarily able to do what it needs to do, because we have these dense belief systems, these dense emotions and things that are in the body. And so that's, at least from my humble opinion perspective and what I've been through, that's what actually causes dis-ease. And it makes us magnetic to things like viruses and bacteria that actually resonate with the frequencies of guilt, shame, and unworthy. On the frequency spectrum, they are actually resonant with those. So kind of circling back to this inner child piece, we can just, again, hold space. And that can be something so simple as just like, I love you, like picturing your inner child in your mind's eye and just like, I love you. You're safe. And if you don't feel safe, like, let's talk about it. Let's journal about it, whatever you're guided to do, because it's also so different for each of us. Some people really get a release from journaling and getting connected that way. Some people are really able to visualize this stuff. And so that's why I love to also guide people into really understanding, helping them understand their own unique intuition and the way they process this. Because sometimes I've heard people just kind of say, oh, this is what intuition is. Well, it's actually, to me, it's so many different things specific to each of us. Like I process energy and I feel so deeply in my body, whereas others, that's not necessarily how they process that. It could be something that's more auditory, more visual. So there's a variety of different ways. So I hope that answers your question.
It answers the question beautifully. The inner child concept it's one that I've explored. And again, our backgrounds are somewhat similar, very similar than different, but it's been a little bit easier for me to integrate it in the terms of like disease, because that's the world I come from, disease patterns and diagnosis. But as I started exploring it, because even when I heard the term adverse childhood experiences, I was floored that this wasn't taught in medical schools. Maybe it is now, because I've been out for a long time. But, there's a strong relationship between childhood trauma and adult illness. And the adult illnesses are the big ones, the ones that are the hardest to heal. And so it's, it just becomes something that we've got this healing opportunity that's not getting discussed. So I'm so glad there's healers like you who are like getting it and like giving it words, giving it a vocabulary, because it's not happening in the doctor's office. It may be happening in a therapist's office, but I'm pretty sure it's not. No one's, having this. So you've given it terms and a vocabulary that are so usable.
Well, I just think it is a beautiful opportunity. And one thing I love to mention too is we all have our own unique medicine too within us. It is weaved through the fabric of our being. If we go back to, for those that want more of like a tangible thing, it's like when you're in your mother's womb, you're not saying, hey, liver cells, let's go ahead and make this magic happen today. This divine intelligence knows what to do. So it's really about allowing it space to do what it wants to do. But this also speaks to the power of our consciousness. And I think that's something that's not talked about quite often enough, because when we're agreeing to certain things, it's then manifesting. So thoughts turning to things that elicit that emotional response. And so it's all tied to these identity structures that become so deeply rooted. And then we think we are this thing, right? Even when we have a disease, like it's like, I have this thing. It's like, well, you're experiencing this thing that's happening. You're having an experience. But when we attach to that experience and we agree to that experience, we reinforce that experience over and over and over again, that it becomes embedded in our energy field that we are this thing and we are an extension of this thing. And so it is so tied to all of that stuff. And you know, I've seen it. I will try to be mindful of this person, but I do know someone who got a medical diagnosis and they didn't have any symptoms prior. They were at the doctor's office, got a diagnosis for Parkinson's, and then several weeks later started having symptoms. And
Absolutely.
so it was like
Absolutely.
the agreement. And I actually had this beautiful soul on my podcast. Her name's Eleni, and she had made this beautiful suggestion. She's like, well, when we receive something like that, like, why are we not searching out the miracles of the people who literally maybe got that and then like they transcended the whole thing and they, you know, they're in expansive health. We go on Google and we look up all like the negative, low vibrational things. And then it's like, we're focused on that, right? And so it also speaks to where we focus on and what we agree to and what we say is what we're creating. We're speaking it into existence. So it's multifaceted, but if we just really can get to the place of where, you know, what is it that I'm choosing? How do I want to feel? And then it's like, okay, well, it could be the reality of the situation. You are experiencing some symptoms, but we can look at it also as this, your body is beautifully trying to get your attention, something that has been suppressed. So it is probably a combination of, you know, a handful of things. It could be an unresolved childhood thing. Maybe, for example, like you never got attention and the sickness is getting you so much attention and love and compassion. And it's like, whoa, well, I never experienced this before. So it's serving you in some way. So it can be a variety of different things.
Oh, wow. What you said, that was so powerful. Oh my goodness. It's as you said that someone got the diagnosis and they didn't have symptoms before. So I have to tell you, in that space, in that space of didn't know it, got the diagnosis, now have the symptoms. In this realm, oh God, it's so, how do I want to describe it? It's a big deal. It is a very big deal. And so I retrain myself because I see patients every day. I retrain myself that even when I'm approaching someone, I need to be very cautious, that I don't want to be telling them this is this and this is who you are and this is it. And that's only been the last few years that I've really had to become conscious to, you know, and even in my own life, especially, but when I'm working with others, that, you know, I may be giving them this information, but I need to be very clear that I'm not their higher self. I'm not their consciousness. So here's the evidence, but I'm not giving this to you. It's not necessarily yours to take. So that's interesting when you said that, because it does happen a lot that someone doesn't have the symptoms and they get the diagnosis and they have it. If you don't mind, can we go just a little bit more into this concept of the higher self?
Yeah.
Because I have felt, I'm talking like with my own, like my Reiki clients, that they often don't feel that that's something they have accessible. So, what kind of advice would you share with a lot of the listeners that feel like they don't have access to this all knowing, when in fact we know what they do? But what kind of advice could you share?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question because sometimes I've felt that way before. You just feel disconnected, right? You feel like you're stuck in this 3D reality and you're just struggling and you're like, I don't know what to do. So I completely understand. A couple of things that I would offer for people is to ask for help too, and to ask for your higher self and for the universe. Because I do believe we live in a free will time-space reality, but we also live in a co-creative reality where we're co-creating with the universe, with our highest. And every time I have asked the universe for help, it will show up. It might not show up right when we want or how we want it to show up. But if you are struggling with that, just I choose to connect with my higher self. And I'm ready for this. I'm here for it. And one thing that is also helpful is dropping into your heart, because the heart is such a beautiful portal for that connection. And another offering I would have would be looking up your human design and or your gene key profile, because there has been the most beautiful wisdom that has flown out of that chart for me that's helped me understand myself on a whole new level. And that's why I speak of, it's not one size fits all for connecting to that intuition. Some people have a more a splenic authority, and what that means is like their intuition is going to speak in those whispers, and oftentimes our intuition does speak in whispers, but the way that we process energy and the way that our unique soul blueprint, it comes through in our human design. And so if you're new to human design or you haven't heard of it, I always recommend that people at least know their type and a bit about that, because that can be helpful, because really it's all about understanding ourselves, right? It's understanding ourselves on a deeper level, because you can't lose your higher self. It's just, there may be that conditioning and that chatter and that noise of that density that is making you feel like you're not connected to it. We're always connected to it, but I can completely empathize and understand if you're feeling disconnected, because of all the, emotions can make us feel very disconnected from that. And another offering I would suggest is just calling in the light of God or source or universe, and just really with your own consciousness, bringing that energy through your body. And you can just vision this beautiful golden light or a rose gold frequency, and just setting the intention for the most high vibrational frequency that your body is ready for to just come through and to just cleanse any density. This is something that you could do every day, and just grounding and connecting to with the planet, because for me, going through this healing journey, there was a part of me that was out of my body that didn't want to do this anymore. And so I really had to honor that and really reconnect with her. And that was a lot of the inner child piece. And so when we ground in and when we envision this, you can go out in nature, you can just envision this connecting. We are connecting with the planet that we're on as well. So you can work with some of those energies on your own and really see if that helps kind of feel a little more connectedness. But oftentimes it's in the pause. Oftentimes it's, like I mentioned, it's in that availability, because what happens when we're in this more masculine energy, this more production mode, we're not in that receiver mode, right? Because we're just doing. And so the receiving of this beautiful energy, the wisdom, the downloads, it comes from the pause. It comes from that openness of receiving. And so I'll offer one last thing, is really take an inventory of where your yes is and no. Because what I've found is when we are saying yes to all these things that don't light us up, that are not expansive, all the shoulds, it clogs up our energetic space. It's like I see it as like this fuzziness in the field. So we're really it creates this more difficulty in connecting with our truth, because our energy is going in so many directions. So just seeing if there's anything you're subscribing to or that you're saying yes to. And it could be big ticket items like a relationship or, a friends that you don't feel expansive when you hang out with, or, fill in the blank there. I'm sure we all have some things. I really had to allow that kind of release of some things that were ready to fall away. So that can help us too, because again, we're clearing space. We're communicating with the universe. It's all a communication. It's like that feedback loop.
So, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I actually feel activated just from this little bit of time with you. It has flown by. Before we go, can you share with the listeners where to find you? And then if there's anything you'd like to share with the listeners, please.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. Like you mentioned, my podcast, New Earth Visionaries, is a way for you to hang out with me and join those. I've been releasing a couple episodes a week. So just a way for you I bring a lot of different guests on as well. So that's a good way to find me, as well as my website, my Instagram, which are both just my name. And I have my community that I mentioned. So I show up there once a week, and we do this type of work as a collective. We do it together. So the conscious creation and the releasing of whatever we're ready to release. And so it's just that space is so near and dear to my heart as well. So, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I like to, make it, people feel comfortable if they're going through something and they just want questions or perspective, or maybe I can, link you up with someone else that could help you. If I can't, I would love to, share space with you in any way that you feel guided.
Thank you so much for joining me for today's special guest episode. It is always a blessing whenever I can have guests join me, and definitely having Amanda for this episode has been just a shining bright light. Just want to let you know that coming up, I am lucky enough that I'll get to be a guest on Amanda's podcast. So if you sign up for my newsletter, I'll make sure to include all the details for that. I will see you in a week where I will actually have another special guest joining me. And of course, in between these podcasts, we can always stay in touch. If you are interested in some freebies, some good information on some of my favorite supplements, click your show notes to find out how we can stay in touch. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Art of Healing podcast. Once again, this is Charlize. You can find out more about me at www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. Did you know I have a blog as well as online courses? Check your show notes to sign up for more information about healing arts, health, and wellness. Thank you. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends, family, and loved ones.